He tanked a killing punch by choice, then made his enemy watch 100,000 ants pour out of the dark. 3 days earlier, he was still hiding a secret city underground with nobody outside knowing his name. This is Jang Hyun's story. Everyone thought he was just an archer. He was actually a beast tamer commanding an army of gold-ranked ants. And he was about to conquer an entire region without most people even realizing it. It started with a message to a vassal named Tak Mongiel. "Come to my suite," he said. "The arena is opening, and everything changes tonight." Tak Mongiel arrived breathless, terrified, loyal to the bone after being saved more times than he could count. Jang Hyun told him to gather every vassal in the shelter and enter the arena together. When night fell, Tak Mongiel panicked, asking if that would expose his lord's secret. Jang Hyun smiled and shook his head, explaining the arena only matched people from the same region against each other. None of his borrowed vassals knew his real combat power anyway, only his farms and his buildings. He joked that Tak Mongiel would never betray him, and the poor man broke into a cold sweat, swearing he never could. Jang Hyun handed him a weapon and told him to train daily in the gravity room, because loyalty alone would not keep him alive. This was his first vassal, and his abilities lined up perfectly with his own, worth every ounce of investment. For 3 days, survivors outside had been unable to leave their shelters, running dry on supplies and hope. Top powers in the region were the obvious choice for desperate people to pledge to. Jang Hyun pictured his magnificent underground city and felt nothing but confidence. The other lords were waiting for the same moment, so he felt no rush to recruit early. He simply trained in the simulation room, quietly waiting for the arena to open. Down in the farm level, a supervisor gathered every worker and announced the lord's command. "Enter the arena tonight." The crowd erupted. Then one troublemaker shouted that their spoils of war should not be handed over as rent. The mob turned into a chorus of complaints about slavery and unfair treatment within seconds. The supervisor calmly called on a massive ant queen named Swift Shadow, who tore through the crowd in an instant. Every loud voice dropped unconscious. The troublemakers knocked flat before they even understood what happened. Silence fell like a held breath. Nobody objected again. Jang Hyun lay down on his own bed that night, closed his eyes, and whispered the word arena 3 times. His vision went black. Then he opened his eyes, standing inside a massive hall with a floating golden sphere. He touched it, and information flooded into the air. Regional arena, world arena, rankings, shop, 10 matches a day, victory points, win streak bonuses, ranks climbing from black iron all the way to myth. He browsed the shop and found dragon whisker grass, skill treasure chest, blueprint chest, and something called an arena badge fragment. The badge alone caught his attention, capped at 5 daily exchanges, requiring 100 fragments just to synthesize once. This was clearly the Dark World's way of pushing every lord to cultivate loyal, trained vassals. He stepped into his first match and drew his dragon bone bow against a bearded warrior, swinging a massive saber. The first arrow bounced harmlessly off a 5-second protection window. Neither of them knew existed yet. The moment protection ended, a second arrow ended the fight instantly, blood spraying. Body thrown 10 meters back. Match after match fell the same way. 1 arrow, 1 kill, 10 straight wins with a perfect record. By the end of the night, he had banked for 100 arena points and for 100 victory points. He spent 500 points on 5 badge fragments, tucking the heavy black metal pieces into his pouch. Back at his shelter, he checked the regional rankings and found himself tied for first with 30 for others. Early was not the same as strong, and he knew the real separation would come as the tiers climbed. Meanwhile, across the region, a rival lord named Singol studied a spy's report about a mysterious archer. The archer had beaten his own vassal with a single perfect shot, cold, precise, unbothered. Singol dismissed it, certain that a mere archer could never threaten his family's fire-mage bloodline. He had no idea he was underestimating the most dangerous beast tamer in the entire region. The next morning, Jang Hyun posted recruitment photos on the area channel, careful to reveal only architecture, never combat power. Rival cronies mocked him instantly, sneering that his shelter must be cramped, calling his post a scam. Then the photos loaded fully, clean modern dormitories glowing on every screen across the region. The mockery died mid-sentence. The area channel exploded into disbelief. Then desperate applications. Private messages flooded in by the hundreds, warriors, crafters, photographers. People with nothing but hope. He accepted every single one, and in seconds, 323 ragged survivors appeared in his central plaza. They stared up at towering pillar buildings and a suspended artificial sun, and wept openly on the ground. Tak Mongiel sorted them into 6 categories: combat, support, life, administrative, research, special. Only 37 were true combat types, but 9 were support. rare talent capable of buffing an entire ant army. Among the newcomers were engineers and a biology doctor named Wang Hyun. Exactly what Jang Hyun needed most. He asked Wang Hyun's team to research gene extraction and fusion, calling it simple, basic work in the dark world. Wang Hyun nearly choked, insisting such research required labs costing hundreds of millions back on Blue Star. Jang Hyun told him not to judge the dark world by old rules. There was black tech here beyond imagination. That same week, a companion named O9 sent an urgent message. He had finally cracked something called the energy converter. From it, he built 2 new inventions. A compressed energy gun 10 times stronger than anything before it, and an elemental absorption orb capable of harvesting raw energy straight from the surrounding environment. Jang Hyun's mind raced. A weapon this powerful, mass-equipped across an entire ant army, would be devastating. 9 also asked for something strange. A massive quiet space, and help gathering materials for a secret project. When Jang Hyun asked what kind of project, O9 said one word: Transformers, meaning a giant, human-piloted mech. Jang Hyun's jaw dropped, then lit up with pure boyish excitement. He agreed instantly, promising every resource needed. Back in his own territory, Jang Hyun discovered something extraordinary while testing his beast-taming ability. Taming gold-rank sentry ants cost almost no spiritual power at all, for less than it should. That meant he could tame an entire army and finally summon them inside the arena itself. He rushed to the ant nest and began taming hundreds of sealed war reserve ants in a single session. 300 gold-ranked black scythe ants fell under his contract, before exhaustion finally forced him to stop. That night, he entered the arena again, and this time when the countdown ended, he did not draw his bow. A wall of gold-ranked ants poured out instead, and the simulated boss died before it could even move. It worked. He clenched his fist. No longer just an archer, now a beast tamer with an army behind him in every match. Days passed. The arena reopened, and this time Jang Hyun matched against a young man in an ornate robe. The stranger studied his dragon bone bow, smiling like a man who'd spotted easy prey, and introduced himself. Singol, ranked first in the region, heir to one of the great families of Korea. He offered Jang Hyun a place as his second-in-command, calling the whole world a matter of influence and bloodline. Jang Hyun listened to the arrogance pile up, insult after insult, and felt nothing but growing amusement. Singol grinned, certain he had won a new servant, right up until Jang Hyun raised the dragon bone bow. The arrow tore through him before he understood what was happening. Unprepared, undefended, gone. The system confirmed the kill and promoted Jang Hyun straight to silver rank on the spot. Outside the arena, the region erupted, the blazing mage's perfect streak, shattered by a single hidden shot. Singol screamed excuses across the area channel, insisting he'd been ambushed. That 10 of this coward wouldn't beat him. Nobody believed him. He fainted from sheer rage reading the mockery flooding his own recruitment channel. Jang Hyun finished his matches calmly, unaware of the chaos, then checked his fragment count. 73 collected. 53 of those came from his own weaker vassals, proof that a large loyal population outproduced any lone hunter. He returned to his office and found 40 more fragments waiting, stacked neatly by his most trusted vassal. He combined every fragment on the desk, and the system asked if he wanted to synthesize a badge. He confirmed. A black iron arena badge formed, offering only 5 attribute points to start. Disappointing, but clearly built to scale. He announced the weak effect publicly on purpose, hoping his vassals wouldn't hoard points chasing something underwhelming. Meanwhile, a companion named Baekhyun, an ally bound by mutual aid contract, sent voice modification beads as a gift. Jang Hyun fed them to 3 ant queens, unlocking real spoken communication across his entire growing network. Wang Hyun's team achieved a breakthrough days later, fully functioning biological communication ants indistinguishable from a phone call. 10 could be cultivated daily, an instant solution to the chaos of managing hundreds of vassals without modern tools. Tak Mongiel proposed something bigger still, a currency system. Coins and banknotes bearing Jang Hyun's own image. A dual economy of currency for goods and contribution points for genuine achievements, deepening loyalty across the territory. Jang Hyun approved every design, watching his makeshift kingdom transform into something resembling a real, functioning nation. An old ally named Chiang Ha teleported in one afternoon, staring at the towering buildings in stunned silence. She needed mutated spring water, on the verge of her own advancement, deep in plant research just like his new doctor. They discovered they'd been researching the exact same field independently, and agreed to share 500 plant samples. An enormous genetic project began, seeds and samples flooding into Wang Hyun's overworked but delighted laboratory. Days later, the arena settlement arrived. and Jang Hyun's bronze badge synthesized again into something stronger. Silver rank. 10 added attribute points now, a damage bonus inside the arena. More proof the badge grew powerful the longer it was fed. That same night, in his 8th match, he faced a green-robed swordsman calling himself the Soaring Swordmaster, Sun Wipong. They traded respectful words first, sizing each other up, each testing the political landscape of the coming war. Sun Wipong refused to submit through pride alone, proposing a duel instead. Winner takes the loser as vassal. He unleashed his ultimate technique, the Soaring Dragon Sword, a strike that closed distance at near teleportation speed. The blade should have ended everything. Instead, it met an endless wall of black, hundreds of gold-ranked ants swallowing him whole. Jang Hyun told him afterward that his technique wasn't bad. It had almost worked. True to his word, Sun Wipong messaged an apology and a vassal application, honoring the bet completely. Jang Hyun learned the swordsman also held a rare alchemy skill, crippled only by poor resources and a barren shelter. Rather than take him as a bound vassal and waste his location as a bridgehead, Jang Hyun kept him as a free ally instead. Sun Wipong traded over nearly his entire stockpile of resources, proving his loyalty without needing to be asked. With 3 regional lords now defeated, humiliated, or recruited, Jang Hyun stood as the undisputed strongest in the area. His glory rank climbed with every new vassal, unlocking Black Mist immunity and the ability to designate a subace. He gathered his 4 teammates, Will, Chiang-ha, Baek-hyun, and O9, for the most important meeting of the entire campaign. Speed is paramount in warfare, he told them. Either do not move at all, or remove every obstacle as fast as possible. His plan was radical. Combine nearly all 5 of their forces onto a single battlefield, 1 lord's war at a time. Alone, each of them was the strongest in their own region, and that alone made them everyone else's shared enemy. Combined, their mutual aid contract and instant teleportation made them an unstoppable, coordinated force nothing could match. The only question left was which region to strike first, and that answer required intelligence nobody yet possessed. Jang Hyun revealed his solution, his glory function's Black Mist immunity, stacked carefully across the midnight boundary. Sending scouts out right before midnight and pulling them back after would double the usable exploration window entirely. Everyone contributed instantly: speed boosting fruit, attribute boiling potions, detection radars, duration extending mirrors. Jang Hyun assembled 6,000 sentry ants in his ant nest hall, formation perfect, murderous aura radiating off every row. Each ant ate a bite of mutated fruit, boosting speed by half for 6 full hours. Timed with impossible precision. Each carried a single grain of blood-soaked wheat, an emergency reserve of raw combat power if danger struck. 60 biological radar discs from O9 doubled their detection range. Dispersed 1 for every 100 ants in the formation. Swift Shadow, the sentry ant queen, requested to command from just outside the shelter rather than safely underground. Physical walls blocked her biological signals, she explained, and she needed clear contact to lead her kin properly. Jang Hyun agreed on one condition: stay near the exit. Retreat instantly if real danger appeared. At exactly 10 at night, the full army streamed out through a dozen tunnel exits into the black mist beyond. For 2.5 brutal hours, Jang Hyun drew a rough map by hand, marking every shelter Swift Shadow's network reported. Hollow circles for the dead and defected, solid circles for the living, triangles for danger zones that struck back. The scouting alone would have been miracle enough, but there was still time left on the immunity clock. He ordered the ants to raid unmanned shelters on the way home, hauling back anything valuable before the clock expired. The last sentry ant crossed back into the shelter exactly as the immunity ran out. Not a single second wasted. Behind them, small mountains of scavenged resources sat stacked in the 5th floor warehouse, waiting to be sorted. The casualty report came in cold and heavy. 874 dead. Over 1,000 severely wounded. Swift Shadow begged for punishment, blaming her own inexperience for the losses in her very first night operation. Jang Hyun told her gently that completing the mission at all, against reinforced beast in total darkness, was already extraordinary. He walked to the mountain of abandoned survival manuals stacked like cabbages, over 1,500 former lives. He touched the topmost one and murmured an apology, then laid his own manual on the peak and let it burn. The entire pile dissolved into ash and light, absorbed completely, his own manual gaining a silver, then golden border. His glory rank surged past level 3, then 4. Black Mist immunity climbing from 30 minutes toward a full 3 hours. A new function unlocked. Popularity value boosting every attribute across every vassal, tied directly to satisfaction and numbers. With every scouted region, more manuals burned, more glory climbed, until level 5 arrived carrying for full hours of immunity. Combined with Bake Kyan's reinforced magic mirror, that for our window stretched into a staggering 6 hours per cycle. The final tally across all 5 regions came back obscene. Over 11,000 abandoned manuals absorbed in total. Wang Hyan arrived with fresh breakthroughs of his own. Gold rank self-destruct ants and a massive hovering ant queen. New gene combinations followed. Cluster fragmentation grenades. Aurora big boys. Double-decker transport beast. Airships. Fast boats. The self-destruct ant queen sensed Jang Hyun's quiet grief over her clan's sacrificial nature, and corrected him gently. Self-destruct was not tragedy to them, she explained. Explosion was their highest art, their single greatest dream fulfilled. Jang Hyun understood then that he'd been measuring every race by human standards, and that understanding shifted something inside him. He named her Mars, telling her that even a moth who flies into flame once shone brilliantly before the end. She puffed with pride like a proud little son, thanking her master. Thoroughly delighted with her new name. Standing at his floor-to-ceiling office window that same week, watching his subjects move like a living colony below, a realization struck him harder than any battle ever had. His power was never truly about controlling ants. It was about rules, establishing them, enforcing them, bending an entire world's order around a single clear vision. The sensation 09 once described to him, the true first-tier comprehension of power, settled over him completely. He examined himself and found no outward change. Yet something fundamental inside had shifted permanently forward. With intelligence gathered, glory climbing, allies unified, and a private army numbering thousands, the pieces were finally in place. Singol still believed himself the strongest lord in the region, still had no idea what was coming for him. Jang Hyun looked out over his glowing underground city, ant colonies stretching endlessly below the artificial sun. 2 days remained before the coordinated strike began. Today is to finish preparing an army built from nothing but ants and patience. He thought back to the boy who once drew a single arrow at a bearded stranger, unsure what the arena even was. That boy was gone now. In his place stood a lord commanding gold-ranked legions, feared across 5 entire regions. The mistake every rival made was the same. They saw an archer. They never saw the army waiting beneath the ground, somewhere in his shelter. Thousands of black scythe-hunting ants curled dormant in perfect formation, ready the instant he called. Somewhere in a mech laboratory, 9 worked tirelessly toward a machine that might grant her the same advancement Jang Hyun had already claimed. Somewhere across the region, Singol prepared scouting teams of his own, still convinced brute family strength would win the day. He had no idea his enemy's ants had already mapped every inch of his territory, down to the coordinate. Jang Hyun poured a cup of World Tree leaf tea, sat at his desk, and reviewed the final battle plan one more time. Speed, coordination, overwhelming force concentrated on a single target before anyone else could react in time. His allies had already agreed. His region would fall first, since he'd done the heaviest lifting gathering intelligence. Then their combined force would sweep outward, region by region, until every rival lord bent the knee or fell. He thought of Singol's arrogance, his stolen recruitment messages, his cruel treatment of the weak survivors around him. There would be no mercy shown to a man who'd built his entire empire on threats and inherited family pride. He thought of his own vassals instead, the ones who wept with joy seeing dormitories cleaner than anything they'd known. Every gold-ranked ant, every arena badge, every scouted map existed to protect exactly those people. Nothing more. Power without purpose was just noise. He had learned that from a self-destruct ant who found meaning in her own end. He finished his tea, set down the cup, and looked out at the artificial sun lighting his underground kingdom. 2 days, then war. Then, if everything held together, an entire region bending under his quiet, patient will. The dragon bone bow that started it all still hung on his wall, a reminder of humbler days not so long ago. But the true weapon had never been the bow. It was the ants, the rules, the patient, ruthless building of an empire underground. Jang Hyun rose from his desk, spread his golden light wings, and flew out toward the ant nest to check his forces one final time. Somewhere below him, an entire hidden civilization stirred in the dark, waiting for the order that would finally set it free. The eternal night was ending soon, and when it did, the region would learn exactly who the swift shadow archer truly was. Not a hunter, not a mere marksman, a beast tamer commanding rules themselves, patient enough to wait for the perfect moment to strike. The moment was almost here. Back in the 5th floor warehouse, Rockspear, the tunneling ant queen, sorted the day's spoils with obsessive, almost joyful precision. Every mountain of scavenged resources organized into neat, categorized piles. a small kingdom of order within the chaos. Jang Hyun walked among the stacks, running his fingers over silver rancor and rare crafting components collected from the dead. Each pile represented a shelter that had fallen, either to monsters, starvation, or the cruelty of another lord entirely. He felt no triumph looking at them, only a grim determination that his own territory would never join that graveyard. Tak Mongiel arrived with updated reports, his eyes still shadowed with exhaustion despite the rest Jang Hyun had ordered. The Combat Command Center had finalized their strike plans against every marked target, across all 5 scouted regions. Jang Hyun reviewed each plan carefully, adjusting timing, troop allocation, and contingencies for the inevitable surprises of real war. Wang Hyun's research team continued their breakthroughs in parallel, refining gene combinations faster than anyone could have predicted. The compressed energy guns 09 had built were distributed across a specialized unit Jang Hyun called the Thunder Squad. 300 black scythe hunting ants, fused with raven genes, thunder bear genes, and red heart fruit, all armed and ready. They could fly. They could strike with lightning. And now they carried firepower rivaling weapons far above their natural rank. Jang Hyun tested one personally in the simulation room, watching a simulated gold rank beast crumble under a single volley. The power was almost frightening, a reminder of exactly how far his forces had come from that first desperate arrow shot. 9 continued her mysterious mech project in the depths of the underground laboratory, rarely surfacing, rarely speaking to anyone but Jang Hyun. He visited occasionally, watching massive components take shape inside the giant humanoid-shaped pit she'd requested weeks earlier. She promised him a seat inside once it was finished, a childhood dream neither of them had ever expected to fulfill. Whether the mech would grant her the same first-tier advancement she suspected, neither of them could yet be certain. But her mechanical heart pulse was something closer to hope than Jang Hyun had ever seen in her before. Chiang Ha and Wang Hyun exchanged mutated seeds every 3 days as promised, their combined research accelerating far beyond either working alone. 500 plant samples slowly transformed into hundreds of viable gene combinations, feeding directly into Jang Hyun's ant army. Sun Wukong settled quietly into his new role, trading his swordsman's discipline for the patient art of alchemy full-time. He seemed happier than Jang Hyun had ever seen him, finally free from a conflict he'd never truly wanted to join. Baek Hyun continued supplying rare items from his family's vast, half-forgotten stockpiles, each one more valuable than the last, while brewed batch after batch of blood boil potion, preparing for the coming assaults with the focus of a seasoned warrior. The 5 allies moved like a single organism now, each contributing their strongest resource toward one shared, inevitable goal. Jang Hyun reflected that this was exactly what he'd always wanted from his ant colonies, translated now into human cooperation, rules, structure, every piece performing its function toward a goal far greater than any single member could achieve. Alone, the night before the assault, he gathered his closest circle one final time in the banquet hall's grand roundtable. No grand speeches were needed. Everyone understood exactly what tomorrow required, and everyone had already prepared their part. Jang Hyun raised a cup of world tree leaf tea in a quiet toast, thanking each of them for trusting a plan this audacious. Will grinned and admitted he'd never fought alongside people this coordinated before, calling it almost too easy to feel real. Chiang Ha reminded everyone that easy plans still required flawless execution, and nobody argued against her caution. Baek Hyun joked that he was mostly there for the food, though everyone knew his family's resources had made this possible. 9 said nothing, simply nodding once, her mind clearly still half-absorbed in whatever final calculations her mech project demanded. Jang Hyun looked at each of them and felt, for the first time in a long while, something close to genuine peace. Whatever happened tomorrow, he would not face it as a lone archer hiding a secret. He would face it as a leader with an army. The meeting ended quietly, everyone retreating to their own preparations, the calm before a storm they had spent weeks building. Jang Hyun returned to his office one last time, watching the artificial sun begin its slow, programmed descent toward night. Tomorrow, the eternal night's final hours would become the backdrop for the opening move of an entire region's conquest. He thought of Ho Singol, still fuming somewhere in his mansion, still utterly unaware of the storm about to break over him. He thought of every vassal who'd wept with joy at simply having a warm bed and enough food for the first time in weeks. This was never really about defeating one arrogant heir. It was about proving that patience, structure, and loyalty could outlast raw pride. Jang Hyun closed his eyes, letting the quiet hum of his underground city settle around him one final peaceful night. Tomorrow, the swift shadow archer would show the entire region exactly what had been growing beneath their feet all along. Not a hunter, not a hidden coward, as Ho Singol had screamed to anyone who would listen, a lord, an army, a reckoning. The eternal night was almost over, and when the light finally returned, it would return to a region that no longer belonged to anyone but him. He rose from his desk, walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, and looked out over the city he had built from nothing but ants and will. Somewhere below, thousands of gold-ranked warriors slept in perfect formation, waiting for a single command to wake. Somewhere across the darkness, rivals slept easy, confident in strength that had never once been truly tested against him. Jang Hyun smiled faintly, turned from the window, and let himself finally rest, ready for whatever the dawn would bring. Tomorrow was not a question anymore. It was simply the next inevitable step in a plan built patiently, piece by piece. From the ground up, the war for the region was about to begin, and for the first time in this entire journey, Jang Hyun felt completely, quietly certain of victory. Not because of raw power alone, though his ants alone could crush most armies outright, but because he had built something none of his rivals had bothered to build: loyalty, structure, a civilization worth defending. Ho Singol had family pride. Sun Wukong once had solitary honor. Jang Hyun had something stronger than either. He had an entire underground kingdom that would fight for him, exactly as fiercely as he fought for it. And in the dark world's brutal calculus of survival, that kind of bond outlasted every inherited bloodline and every arrogant boast. The morning finally arrived, and Jang Hyun woke before his usual alarm, some instinct pulling him from sleep early. He dressed quickly, checked his badge, his bow, his contracted ants, and felt the familiar cold clarity of a hunter before the kill. Tak Mongiel met him at the ant nest entrance, reporting that every unit stood ready. Every allied teleportation link confirmed and stable. Will, Cheung-ha, Baek Hyun, and O9 arrived one by one, each carrying the specific tools their combined strategy demanded. Jang Hyun looked at the assembled group, at Swift Shadow's perfectly formed ranks, at Mo's dormant black scythe legions stirring awake. He gave the order calmly, without ceremony, without dramatic speeches. Simply the word they'd all been waiting weeks to hear: begin. The ground trembled as thousands of gold-ranked ants poured from a dozen hidden tunnels toward Ho Singol's unsuspecting territory. Overhead, the Thunder Squad launched into formation, compressed energy guns gleaming, lightning crackling along raven-fused wings. Jang Hyun rose into the air himself, golden light wings carrying him above the advancing army like a general surveying his own storm. Somewhere ahead, Ho Singol's mansion sat silent, its lord still asleep, still utterly unaware his empire was about to end before breakfast. This was not revenge. This was not even truly conquest for its own sake. This was simply the natural result of patience meeting arrogance. Jang Hyun had spent weeks building an army in silence while his rival wasted his time on threats and inherited pride. Now the silence broke all at once. An entire region about to learn exactly what had been growing beneath the ground. The Swift Shadow Archer was a lie he'd let stand for convenience. The truth, arriving now, was something far more absolute. A beast tamer, a rule maker, a lord whose quiet patience had built an empire strong enough to swallow an entire region whole. The war had finally begun, and Jang Hyun flew toward it without a single trace of doubt left in his heart. Everything he had built, every ant tamed, every vassal recruited, every alliance forged, had led to this single, inevitable morning. Whatever came next, he would meet it exactly as he had met everything before. Calm, prepared, utterly, completely ready. The region would remember this day as the moment the archer disappeared, and the true lord finally stepped into the light. Ho Singol's forces scrambled awake to alarms blaring across his walls, completely unprepared for the storm already breaking over them. Jang Hyun's ant army moved with terrifying coordination, tunneling ants collapsing walls from below while sentry and scouted every exit. The Thunder Squad descended from above, lightning bolts and compressed energy fire tearing through hastily assembled defenses. Ho Singol himself burst from his mansion in a blaze of fire magic, screaming that this was impossible, that no archer held this power. Jang Hyun landed calmly before him, dragon bone bow lowered, the true weight of his army finally visible in full daylight. Thousands of gold-ranked ants surrounded the mansion in a living wall of black chitin, patient and utterly unstoppable. Ho Singol's confidence shattered completely, his flame sputtering as he realized exactly how badly he had misjudged his rival. He begged, threatened, invoked his family's name one final desperate time, and none of it slowed the tide closing around him. Jang Hyun told him simply that inherited pride meant nothing against patience, structure, and an army built on genuine loyalty. The battle ended quickly, decisively, exactly as every previous confrontation between them had, only now on a far grander scale. Ho Singol's territory fell within hours, his vassals absorbed, his resources seized. his name erased from the region's power structure entirely. Word spread instantly across every remaining shelter in the area. The swift shadow archer was gone. The true lord had arrived. Survivors who had wavered for weeks now flooded Jang Hyun's channels with applications, no longer needing convincing of any kind. His allies moved next, each striking their own targets with the same devastating coordination that had crushed Singol so completely. Region after region fell in rapid succession, the 5 allies sweeping through resistance that had never faced anything like their combined force. Jang Hyun's underground city swelled with new vassals daily, his glory rank climbing steadily toward heights few lords ever reached. O9's mysterious mech project neared completion in parallel, her mechanical heart pulsing with something closer to genuine anticipation now. Wang Hyan's research laboratory produced breakthrough after breakthrough, gene combinations growing more sophisticated with every passing day. The eternal night finally began drawing to its true end, daylight lengthening, black mist restrictions lifting bit by careful bit. Jang Hyun stood atop his 50th floor office one final time, looking out over a region that finally, completely, belonged to him. The war was not entirely finished, distant pockets of resistance still scattered across the map, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. He thought back to that first desperate night, a mattress-sized gate of ants and one terrified boy with a dragon bone bow. That boy was gone now, replaced by someone who understood exactly what it meant to build rules strong enough to hold an entire world. His vassals moved below him like a living city, purposeful, cared for, protected by an army most of them would never even see. This was the true shape of his power, not the bow, not even the ants themselves, but the patient structure binding it all together. Jang Hyun smiled, turned from the window, and prepared for whatever the next region, the next rival, the next challenge would bring. Because whatever came, he would face it exactly as he always had. Patient, prepared, utterly, completely unstoppable. The swift shadow archer had been a convenient lie, worn for a season while the true storm gathered strength beneath the ground. Now that storm had a name, a face, and an empire built from nothing but ants, patience, and a will that refused to break. Jang Hyun, once mistaken for a simple archer, had become the undisputed lord of an entire region, and he was only just beginning. The eternal night was ending, and the world that emerged from it would remember exactly who had been patient enough to inherit it. Weeks earlier, before the war even began, Jang Hyun had unlocked something few survivors in the region ever reached: the World Arena. Reaching gold rank opened a door that had stayed grayed out and untouchable through every prior arena visit. He entered anonymous mode first, unwilling to expose his full strength to strangers who might one day become allies or rivals. The venue shocked him immediately, a real forest, fragrant, alive. Nothing like the crude flat stages of the regional arena. Somewhere in the trees, an opponent roared insults before Jang Hyun even located him, calling him a coward, demanding he show himself. Jang Hyun frowned at the noise, unimpressed, and simply summoned his full ant army instead of bothering to reply. A black tide swallowed the forest whole, and in under a minute, the entire battlefield shattered like broken glass. The system rewarded him 100 arena points and 200 victory points, more than double a full regional winning streak. His second match dropped him into a desert, unfamiliar terrain he'd never trained for, and it didn't matter in the slightest. His third match ended the same way, points climbing steadily higher with every consecutive win. 300, then 400. The World Arena rules warned him something crucial. Only the top 10% of survivors would earn rewards each month. The bottom 10% would be expelled entirely, losing their qualification the moment the settlement period ended. Worse still, the third rule stated plainly that regional arenas would close entirely once an area's chief was finally decided. Jang Hyun understood immediately what this meant. Whoever became area chief fastest would lock in advantages nobody else could ever catch up to. This did not conflict with his plan at all. It confirmed exactly why speed had always been the correct approach from the very beginning. His arena badge continued climbing in parallel with the war, each stage granting stranger and more powerful effects than the last. At gold rank, the badge offered a full 20 attribute points, a 30% arena damage bonus, and something entirely new: a 10% boost to comprehension of strength itself, the single rarest and most valuable currency in any advancement journey. Jang Hyun understood the weight of that bonus better than almost anyone, having felt firsthand how comprehension gated every breakthrough. Pushing the badge further would require advancement fragments now, items no ordinary vassal could simply hand over through arena grinding. He filed that problem away for later, trusting that momentum and resources from the coming conquest would eventually solve it. Back in the underground city, his popularity value climbed alongside his glory rank, boosting every attribute across his entire army. 11%, then higher, tied directly to the number, quality, and satisfaction of every subject living beneath his artificial sun. Tak Mongiel's administrative reforms kept satisfaction climbing steadily, reward systems, promotion pots, and fair treatment reinforcing loyalty daily. Jang Hyun realized the dark world itself was quietly rewarding exactly the kind of civilization he'd been building instinctively all along. Rules rewarded rules, structure rewarded structure. The system favored lords who built real nations instead of simple armed camps. That realization only deepened his confidence heading into the coordinated assault, knowing his foundation was fundamentally stronger than any rivals. Singol, by contrast, had built nothing but fear and inherited pride, a foundation that cracked the instant real pressure arrived. The difference showed clearly in the aftermath of his fall, his former vassals defecting eagerly, relieved to finally escape his cruelty. Jang Hyun absorbed many of them without hesitation, his 6-ministry system already prepared to sort and place new arrivals efficiently. Within days of the conquest, his territory swelled past 2,000 subjects, each one another thread in his growing popularity value. His glory rank pushed towards 6, though the experience threshold now demanded numbers so vast even conquest alone struggled to keep pace. Still, every abandoned manual absorbed from fallen shelters pushed him steadily closer, patient progress compounding with every passing day. 9 finally announced her mech nearing true completion. The humanoid frame filling the massive pit rock spirit had excavated weeks earlier. Jang Hyun visited the laboratory personally, staring up at a machine easily 40 meters tall, plated in dark alloy, silent and waiting. 9 explained the final components. Compressed energy cores scaled up from the guns already proven on the battlefield. Data lines and her own mechanical heart would handle control, sharing the burden so neither system alone would be overwhelmed. She admitted, quietly, that she suspected completing this project might trigger her own long-awaited advancement to the first tier. Jang Hyun told her he hoped so, genuinely, having watched her work tirelessly for weeks without ever asking for reward. The final activation test was scheduled for the same week the war's first major phase concluded, timing that felt almost deliberate. Across the region, news of the conquest spread through every surviving channel, survivors scrambling to understand the sudden shift in power. Some lords attempted hasty alliances against the growing threat, panic coalitions forming overnight out of pure desperate self-preservation. None of them understood the true scale of what they were facing. 5 allied lords with a combined mutual aid teleportation network. Will's territory fell next in the coordinated sweep, his own rivals overwhelmed by a force that arrived without warning and left without mercy. Xiang, his region, followed close behind, her mastery of mutated plants proving as devastating in warfare as it had been in research. Baekhyun's conquest came almost gently by comparison, many lords in his region surrendering the moment they recognized his family's name. 09's own territory remained the trickiest, her rivals having prepared specifically against her mechanical inventions for months in advance. Jang Hyun personally led reinforcements into her region, ant legions clearing obstacles exactly as he had promised her weeks earlier. With his help, her lingering resistance crumbled within a single day, clearing the path for her mech project to proceed uninterrupted. 5 regions, 5 conquest, completed in a span of time that should have taken lesser lords the better part of a year. The Eternal Night's final hours ticked away as the last pockets of scattered resistance surrendered, rather than face annihilation. Jang Hyun stood once more at his floor-to-ceiling window, watching daylight finally begin creeping back across a transformed landscape. His glory rank had climbed to level 6 during the conquest, unlocking immunity durations that made future operations almost trivial. A new function appeared alongside it, something the dark world called territorial resonance, subtly strengthening every structure within his domain. He filed the details away for careful study later, more interested for now in simply savoring the moment of hard-won peace. Tak Mongiel arrived with updated population figures, subjects now numbering well past 3,000 across a rapidly expanding underground network. Wang Hyun's laboratory had grown into a genuine institution, dozens of researchers cataloging gene combinations at a pace nobody could have predicted. Sun Weipong's alchemy had matured enough to produce genuine healing pills, easing recovery for every ant wounded in the campaign. The self-destruct ant queen, Mars, had bred an entire new generation, each one carrying her proud understanding of their explosive purpose. The hovering ant queen's double-decker transports now ferried supplies and reinforcements between allied territories in mere minutes. Every piece of the system Jang Hyun had built now worked together seamlessly, exactly the way he'd once dreamed ants alone might. Except now it was not merely ants. It was ants and humans, structure and loyalty, patience and overwhelming force, all moving as one. Nine finally called him down to the laboratory for the mech's true activation, her voice carrying something rare, genuine nervous excitement. Jang Hyun arrived to find the massive machine standing fully assembled, compressed energy cores glowing faintly along its armored chest. Nine climbed into the cockpit first, data lines connecting to her mechanical heart, the whole laboratory falling utterly silent in anticipation. The mech's eyes lit for the first time, twin points of light flaring to life across its featureless helmet. It took one slow, deliberate step forward, the entire floor trembling under its weight, and O9 let out a sound close to laughter. Jang Hyun grinned wide, watching his companion's childhood dream and his own boyhood fantasy come alive. In the same impossible machine. Moments later, O9 confirmed what she'd suspected all along. The activation ritual had triggered exactly the advancement she'd hoped for. Her mechanical heart pulsed with newfound clarity, her thought processes sharpening in ways she struggled to fully articulate immediately. Jang Hyun clapped her on the shoulder, told her congratulations, and promised he'd hold her to that test ride she'd offered weeks earlier. She managed something close to a genuine smile, rare and unguarded, before returning her focus to calibrating the machine's new systems. With the mech operational and advancement achieved, Jang Hyun's small circle of allies now stood stronger than most entire Lord Councils. Word of the mech spread cautiously through allied channels only, kept carefully hidden from the wider region for now. Some advantages, Jang Hyun understood, were worth protecting in silence far longer than any recruitment photo ever could be. He returned to his own territory to find new applications flooding in. From every corner of the 5 conquered regions, survivors who had wavered for weeks now saw clearly which lord actually protected and provided for the people beneath him. Jang Hyun accepted them steadily, his 6 ministry system absorbing new talent efficiently. Never once overwhelmed by the growing numbers, his popularity value climbed higher still, boosting every attribute across a population now approaching 4,000 loyal subjects. The dragon bone bow still hung on his office wall, a relic now of humbler days, though he never considered removing it. It reminded him where all of this had truly started: one arrow, one desperate archer, one secret hidden beneath an ordinary bed frame. Now that secret had become an empire, 5 regions strong, an army of gold-ranked ants, and a mech standing silent and ready. Singol's fate had already become a cautionary tale whispered across every remaining shelter. In the wider dark world, nobody dared underestimate the swift shadow archer anymore, though most still didn't understand exactly what he truly was. A beast tamer, a rule maker, a lord who had turned patience itself into the sharpest weapon anyone in this world had ever seen. Jang Hyun sat in his office one final quiet evening, sipping world tree leaf tea, watching his city glow beneath its artificial sun. Tak Mongiel knocked softly, entering with the latest reports, his exhaustion finally replaced by something closer to quiet, steady pride. Everything was on track, he reported. The territory stable, the population thriving, the war, for now, decisively won. Jang Hyun thanked him, told him to rest properly for once, and watched his most loyal vassal finally allow himself a genuine smile. Outside the window, the artificial sun dimmed slowly toward its programmed evening, mimicking a blue star sunset none of them would ever see again. Jang Hyun thought of everyone who had gotten him here. Tak Mongiel's tireless loyalty, Wang Hyun's quiet brilliance, Swift Shadow's fierce discipline, Mars's proud acceptance of her clan's purpose, O9's stubborn genius, Sun Lipong's honored word, Xian his shared research, Baek Hyun's generosity, Will's steady strength. Every single one of them had built this alongside him, thread by careful thread, into something worth protecting fiercely. He raised his teacup toward the glowing city below in a silent, private toast, thanking a world of ants and humans both for trusting him. The war for the region had ended in victory, faster and cleaner than anyone could have predicted, built on patience rather than raw force alone. But Jang Hyun understood this was not truly the end of anything. It was simply the closing of the very first chapter. Beyond his 5 conquered regions lay a dark world with over 800,000 such territories, each one hiding its own secrets and threats. Somewhere out there, other lords were surely building their own quiet empires, other beast tamers, other alchemists, other hidden mech projects. Jang Hyun intended to be ready for every single one of them, patient, prepared, and utterly unwilling to ever be caught underestimating anyone again. He set down his teacup, looked out at the dimming artificial sun, and allowed himself, finally, one full night of genuine, well-earned rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new territories to consider, new rivals to study, new opportunities the dark world would inevitably present. Tonight, he simply watched his city sleep, thousands of ants and humans alike resting safely beneath the sky he had built with his own hands. This was never supposed to happen to someone like him. An ordinary survivor with an unusual affinity for insects nobody else wanted. Yet here he stood, Lord of 5 regions, commander of a mechanized army, patient architect of rules an entire dark world now had to respect. The swift shadow archer had been a convenient disguise. The truth beneath it had always been something far stranger, and far more powerful. A beast tamer who understood, better than anyone, that true dominion was never about brute force alone, but about the rules you chose to build. Jang Hyun closed his eyes that night with a quiet, subtle confidence. Knowing whatever the dark world sent next, he would already be ready for it. Because he had learned the one lesson that mattered most in this new, brutal existence. Patience, structure, and loyalty always outlast raw pride. The eternal night had finally ended. Daylight stretching wider across a region that now bore his mark from border to border. And somewhere beneath it all, in tunnels stretching for miles, an army of gold-ranked ants slept soundly, waiting for their lord's next call. Days after the war's first phase settled, reports trickled in from the furthest edges of the 5 conquered regions, mostly quiet, mostly stable. A handful of stubborn holdouts remained, small shelters to isolated or to paranoid to have heard the news of the sweeping conquest. Jang Hyun dispatched small detachments of sentry ants rather than his full army, unwilling to waste overwhelming force on such minor resistance. Most surrendered the moment they saw gold-ranked ants approaching, having already heard whispered rumors of what happened to those who refused. A rare few fought back, desperate survivors with nothing left to lose. And Jang Hyun made sure his forces showed restraint wherever possible. Unnecessary cruelty built resentment, and resentment built future rebellion. A lesson he'd absorbed from watching Ho Singol's empire collapse overnight. Better to offer surrender and integration than senseless slaughter. A philosophy that had already proven itself far more sustainable than pure conquest. Tak Mongiel's administrative machine processed the influx smoothly. Promotion paths and fair treatment converting even reluctant holdouts into loyal subjects. Within 2 weeks, the 5 regions functioned as a single unified territory. Resources flowing freely between what had once been 5 separate empires. Jang Hyun's popularity value climbed past 70, boosting attributes across his entire population in ways even he hadn't fully anticipated. His glory rank pushed toward level 7, the experience threshold now demanding numbers that would have seemed impossible mere weeks earlier. Yet the conquered territories kept providing. Abandoned manuals from the chaos of war still surfacing steadily as scouts combed every corner. O9's mech remained his proudest secret weapon, tested regularly in isolated training grounds far from any prying eyes or rival scouts. She'd named it herself eventually. Something simple and understated that Jang Hyun found endearing given the machine's terrifying raw power. Wang Hyun's laboratory continued its steady march of breakthroughs, gene combinations growing ever more sophisticated with each passing research cycle. A new combination emerged one week, fusing tunneling ant genetics with sentry ant speed, creating scouts capable of burrowing beneath enemy walls. Jang Hyun immediately saw the strategic value, ordering a dedicated unit cultivated for future reconnaissance missions. Beyond the conquered regions, Sun Wukong's alchemy matured further still, producing pills that accelerated ant cultivation speed, easing the resource strain of rapid expansion. Chiang's research yielded an entirely new class of mutated plant, one capable of neutralizing black mist exposure within a small radius. If refined further, such plants could eventually reduce the entire territory's dependence on glory-based immunity. For basic daily operations, Jang Hyun encouraged her to pursue it aggressively, recognizing the strategic value of an ability that didn't rely solely on his own advancement. Baek Hyun continued serving as an unofficial diplomat, his family name smoothing over tensions with distant relatives, scattered across the conquered territories. Will took charge of training the growing combat department, his blunt, practical approach proving surprisingly effective for teaching raw recruits. The Combat Command Center, once a skeleton staff cobbled together from research assistants, now operated as a genuine strategic institution. Detailed maps of all 5 regions hung across its walls, updated constantly with fresh intelligence from ongoing scouting operations. Jang Hyun visited regularly, reviewing plans not for further conquest yet, but for defense, ensuring no rival could ever repeat what he'd done to Ho Singol. Ironic, he thought, that the very strategy which had won him 5 regions was now the strategy he feared most from potential future rivals. He ordered additional sentry ant patrols along every border, early warning systems designed to catch any coordinated strike long before it landed. The lesson of speed and coordination had been his greatest weapon. He intended to make certain it could never be turned against him. Weeks passed in this steady rhythm, conquest settling into governance, chaos settling into structure, were settling slowly into genuine peace. The eternal night's memory faded into history for most of his subjects, replaced by the daily rhythm of a functioning, thriving civilization. Jang Hyun found himself with something he hadn't expected to value quite this much: actual free time, actual moments of genuine rest. He spent some of it in the gravity room, pushing his own attributes steadily higher, refusing to let leadership dull his personal edge. He spent some of it in the arena still, climbing steadily through the world arena's rankings, careful never to reveal his full strength to openly. His arena badge continued climbing as well, gold rank giving way slowly toward platinum as advancement fragments trickled in from rare drops. Each new tier brought stranger, more powerful effects, confirming his earlier suspicion that the badge rewarded exactly the patient long game he'd played. He spent time, too, simply walking his underground city unguarded, listening to the easy chatter of subjects who no longer feared their lord. The clerks in the administrative hall still teased him behind his back occasionally, and he found he genuinely didn't mind it at all. It meant they felt safe enough to laugh, safe enough to gossip, safe enough to simply exist as people rather than frightened survivors. That safety, more than any conquered region or gold-ranked army, felt like the truest measure of everything he'd built since that first terrified night. One evening, Chiang-ha visited unannounced again, this time carrying news of her own advancement finally completed. After months of careful preparation, Jang Hyun congratulated her warmly, noting the subtle shift in her aura. That same strange, magnetic quality advancement seemed to grant everyone. She admitted the process had been harder than expected, requiring resources even her extensive plant research hadn't fully anticipated needing. Jang Hyun offered whatever support she still required, understanding that strong allies made for a far more stable future than isolated strength alone. She thanked him, then turned the conversation toward a new project, something involving cross-pollinating mutated plants across all 5 regions simultaneously. The potential yield, she explained, could produce genetic diversity unlike anything achieved before, opening doors neither of their research teams had considered. Jang Hyun approved instantly, already imagining the strange new ant combinations such diversity might eventually make possible. Their partnership, born from a chance conversation about mutated spring water, had grown into something resembling genuine, mutual respect. He reflected that most of his strongest alliances had started this way. Small moments of shared curiosity blossoming into lasting, valuable bonds. Will stop by less often now, his own territory management demanding most of his attention. Though he always brought news when he did visit, his combat training programs had produced several genuinely promising vassals, warriors capable of standing alongside gold-ranked ants without flinching. Jang Hyun made a note to formally recognize a few of them, understanding that visible reward for excellence only strengthened loyalty further. Baek Hyun's visits remained the most frequent and the most food-focused. Though Jang Hyun suspected genuine friendship lay beneath the constant freeloading, he never charged Baek Hyun for a single meal, understanding that the resources and connections he provided far outweighed any dinner's cost. Nine remained the most reclusive of them all, though her visits, when they happened, always carried some new invention or breakthrough worth celebrating. Her mech continued receiving upgrades in secret, its capabilities growing steadily beyond what even Jang Hyun fully understood at this point. He trusted her completely with it regardless, knowing her loyalty ran deeper than any contract or obligation could ever properly measure. Months into this new peace, word finally arrived of activity beyond the 5 conquered regions, other lords beginning their own tentative expansions. Jang Hyun studied the reports carefully, noting patterns, noting names, noting which territories might eventually become either threats or opportunities. The dark world stretched on endlessly beyond his current borders, over 800,000 regions waiting, each one hiding its own stories. He understood now that his conquest, however impressive, was merely the first small step in a much longer, much larger journey ahead. Somewhere out there, other survivors were surely awakening similar strange, overpowered talents, building their own quiet empires in their own quiet corners. Jang Hyun intended to meet every single one of them from a position of overwhelming strength, patient preparation always outlasting reckless ambition. He gathered his allies once more for a planning session, this time focused not on conquest, but on consolidation, defense, and careful future growth. Will suggested fortifying the border regions further, ensuring no surprise strike could ever replicate what they'd done to Ho Singol. Chiang-ha proposed expanding agricultural research across all 5 territories, ensuring resource independence regardless of future conflicts. Baek Hyun offered to reach out through his family's remaining connections, gathering intelligence on distant regions before any real threat emerged. Nine simply asked for more time and more resources, promising her mech project would eventually yield defensive capabilities beyond anything imagined. Jang Hyun approved every proposal, understanding that a coalition built on genuine trust required exactly this kind of open, honest collaboration. The meeting ended not with grand declarations but with the quiet, practical satisfaction of allies who trusted each other completely. That trust, more than any army or any advancement, felt like the truest foundation for whatever the dark world still had waiting ahead. Jang Hyun returned to his office afterward, sat at his desk, and opened his manual to review the territory's latest comprehensive report. Population approaching 5,000 across 5 unified regions, glory rank climbing steadily, arena badge nearing platinum, research accelerating daily. Every metric told the same story: patient, steady growth built on genuine structure rather than fleeting conquest or borrowed strength. He thought back one final time to that very first night, a terrified survivor drawing his first arrow against an unknown, unfamiliar enemy. That boy could never have imagined this, an empire built from ants and patience. Alliances forged through genuine trust rather than fear. Jang Hyun closed the manual, looked out at his glowing artificial sun, and allowed himself a rare, genuine moment of quiet satisfaction. Whatever the dark world sent next, whatever distant lord or hidden threat eventually emerged from beyond his current borders, he would be ready, because he had learned the truest lesson this brutal new existence had to offer. Patience and structure would always outlast reckless raw power. The swift shadow archer had been a useful disguise for a season. The truth beneath it had always been something far more enduring. A beast tamer who understood that true dominion was never about the size of your army, but about the rules you patiently chose to build. 5 regions bore his mark now, thousands of loyal subjects, an army of gold-ranked ants, a mech waiting quietly in reserve. And somewhere beyond his current borders, an entire dark world waited, vast and mostly unknown, full of both danger and opportunity alike. Jang Hyun intended to meet every bit of it exactly the way he'd met everything so far: calm, patient, and utterly prepared. He rose from his desk, walked once more to the floor-to-ceiling window, and watched his city settle peacefully into its programmed evening. This was never the end of his story. It was simply the closing of its very first, and by far its smallest, chapter. Beyond these 5 regions waited a dark world of 800,000 territories, each one a new test, a new opportunity, a new story. Jang Hyun smiled faintly, turned from the window, and let himself finally, fully rest, ready for whatever tomorrow's dark world would bring. The eternal night had ended, the conquest had succeeded, and somewhere beneath his feet, an army of ants slept soundly, waiting for their lord. Whatever came next, he would face it exactly as he always had: patient, prepared, and utterly, completely unafraid of what waited in the dark. 3 months into the new peace, the first genuine external threat finally surfaced. A coalition forming somewhere beyond the eastern border. Scouts reported unfamiliar banners, lords Jang Hyun had never encountered, moving with a coordination that suggested they too understood cooperation. He gathered his allies immediately, spreading the intelligence across the table with the same careful precision that had won them 5 regions. We'll study the formations grimly, noting these lords seemed to have learned from watching Singol's spectacular, humiliating collapse. Chiang Ha pointed out several unfamiliar plant-based abilities among the coalition's ranks, suggesting research capabilities rivaling their own laboratory. Baekhyun recognized one banner immediately, a distant cousin of his own family, someone he'd assumed had died months earlier in the chaos. 9 offered quietly that her mech, now fully calibrated, stood ready for genuine combat testing should diplomacy fail to resolve things peacefully. Jang Hyun listened to every report carefully, weighing options, understanding that this threat differed fundamentally from the chaos of the eternal night. These were not desperate survivors fighting for scraps. These were organized lords, deliberately probing the edges of a territory they viewed as vulnerable. He decided against immediate aggression, choosing instead to send Baekhyun as an envoy, testing whether peaceful terms might resolve things first. Baekhyun returned 2 days later with mixed news. The coalition's leadership open to negotiation, but deeply suspicious of Jang Hyun's true strength. They had heard rumors, exaggerated and distorted through countless retellings, of an archer who somehow commanded impossible, overwhelming power. Jang Hyun decided the moment had come to reveal a portion of the truth. Understanding that mystery alone could not sustain peace indefinitely, he arranged a formal meeting at the border, bringing a modest but unmistakable escort. Gold-ranked ants marching in disciplined, silent formation. The coalition's leaders arrived cautiously, and Jang Hyun watched their composure crack the moment they saw the true scale of his forces. He offered terms plainly: trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, respect for existing borders. Everything a reasonable coalition should have wanted from the start. Most accepted immediately. relief playing on their faces at avoiding a war they now clearly understood they could never have won. One holdout remained stubborn. A lord convinced his own family's ancient bloodline entitled him to dominance, regardless of the numbers arrayed against him. Jang Hyun recognized the pattern instantly, having seen this exact arrogance destroy Ho Singol months earlier. Under nearly identical circumstances, he offered one final chance at peaceful terms, patient even now, understanding that unnecessary conflict served nobody's genuine long-term interests. The holdout refused, drawing his weapon in a display of pure, wounded pride, demanding a duel to settle the matter of dominance directly. Jang Hyun agreed calmly, stepping forward without his bow, without summoning a single ant, relying instead on pure trained physical combat. The duel ended in under 10 seconds, his opponent's overconfident strike parried effortlessly, a single counterblow ending the confrontation completely. The holdout lord surrendered on the spot, humiliated but alive, and the coalition's remaining leaders finalized peaceful terms without further argument. Jang Hyun returned home that evening having gained 6 new allied territories, without a single casualty on either side of the negotiation. Patience, once again, had proven far more valuable than aggression. Exactly the lesson he'd carried with him since defeating Ho Singol. Tak Mongiel processed the new alliance agreement swiftly, trade routes opening within days, resources flowing freely between the expanded network of territories. Wang Hyun gained access to entirely new plant and creature samples from the newly allied regions, his research accelerating yet again. Qianghai exchanged seeds and techniques with researchers from the coalition, their combined knowledge growing richer with every new partnership formed. Jang Hyun's popularity value climbed past 80, boosted now by a population and reputation stretching far beyond his original 5 conquered regions. His glory rank inched toward level 8, though the threshold now demanded numbers that would take genuine patience and steady growth to reach. He found he no longer minded the slower pace, understanding that sustainable, structured growth mattered more than any dramatic overnight leap forward. Months passed in this steady rhythm, alliances deepening, research accelerating, his territory's reputation for fairness spreading further with each passing season. Survivors from increasingly distant regions began seeking him out directly, having heard stories of a lord who protected rather than exploited his people. Jang Hyun welcomed each new arrival personally when he could, understanding that a lord who forgot his people's faces eventually forgot their loyalty too. O9's mech saw its first true field test during a minor border skirmish, a rogue group of mutated beasts threatening a newly allied territory. The machine's first steps into open combat proved everything her months of secretive work had promised, beasts scattering or falling before its advance. Word of the mech spread quickly this time, deliberately allowed to circulate, a clear signal to any future rival of exactly what awaited them. Rival lords who might have once considered testing Jang Hyun's borders reconsidered entirely. Upon hearing detailed accounts of the towering machine, deterrence, Jang Hyun realized, could accomplish nearly as much as actual conflict, provided the threat behind it was genuine and clearly understood. He allowed the mech's reputation to grow carefully, never overusing it, understanding that mystery combined with proven strength created the most stable piece. Sun Weipong's alchemy reached new heights during this period, producing pills capable of accelerating human recovery, nearly as effectively as the light healing ants. Jang Hyun distributed these carefully among his most valuable vassals, ensuring his human forces remained as resilient as his ever-growing ant army. Will's combat training program produced its first genuine graduates, warriors capable of holding their own even against silver-rank mutated beast alone. Jang Hyun formally recognized each of them, understanding that visible reward for genuine excellence remained one of his most powerful tools. For loyalty, the territory's economy flourished under the currency system Tak Mongiel had designed. Market stalls appearing throughout the underground city's public plazas. Subjects traded freely now, contribution points reserved for genuine achievement. Currency handling the daily business of ordinary, comfortable survival. Jang Hyun walked these markets occasionally unguarded, listening to the easy hum of commerce that had replaced the desperate silence of the eternal night. A merchant once offered him a discount without recognizing his own lord, and Jang Hyun paid full price anyway, smiling quietly at the small moment. These were the details that mattered most to him now. Small proofs that his people had built genuine, ordinary lives within his extraordinary city. Word arrived one evening of a distant region suffering under a particularly cruel lord. Reports of forced labor and brutal punishment for minor infractions. Jang Hyun felt the old, familiar anger stir, the same anger that had once fueled his conquest of Ho Singol's cruel little empire. He discussed the situation carefully with his allies, unwilling to repeat the mistake of reckless aggression without proper intelligence and preparation first. Qianghua suggested a diplomatic approach first, offering the cruel lord's own oppressed subjects a path to defection rather than immediate open war. Jang Hyun agreed, dispatching sentry ants quietly into the region, gathering intelligence while simultaneously spreading word of his own fair, protective governance. Within weeks, defections began trickling toward his borders, survivors risking everything to escape cruelty for a chance at genuine, stable safety. The cruel lord's territory weakened steadily as his own population abandoned him. Exactly the kind of slow, patient pressure Jang Hyun preferred. When the moment finally came for direct action, the conquest proved almost anticlimactic. The lord's remaining forces too depleted to offer real resistance. Jang Hyun absorbed the region without unnecessary bloodshed, his reputation for fairness having done most of the difficult work long before any battle began. This became his preferred method going forward. Patient pressure and genuine reputation accomplishing what raw force alone could never sustainably achieve. His territory's borders expanded steadily over the following year, not through constant warfare, but through the slow, magnetic pull of fair governance. Other lords began approaching him directly now, seeking alliance rather than risking confrontation. Understanding exactly what his coalition had come to represent, Jang Hyun welcomed each genuine partnership, careful always to verify sincerity. Having learned from Singol's collapse exactly how quickly false loyalty crumbled, Wang Hyun's research laboratory had grown into something resembling a genuine university, training new researchers drawn from across the expanding territory. Breakthrough followed breakthrough at a pace that would have seemed impossible. During those first desperate days after the eternal night began, new ant combinations emerged regularly now, each one refined and tested carefully before deployment. Jang Hyun's army growing more sophisticated by the season. O9's mechanical projects expanded beyond the original mech. Smaller support units now assisting with construction, defense, and rapid resource transportation. Her advancement had opened doors even she hadn't fully anticipated. Her mechanical heart now capable of feats that once seemed purely theoretical. Jang Hyun's own advancement continued steadily as well, his comprehension of rules and structure deepening with every territory he governed fairly. He suspected, though he couldn't yet confirm it, that a second-tier advancement waited somewhere ahead. Once his rule-based comprehension matured fully, Chungha, his old teammate turned trusted ally, visited regularly now. Their shared research history having blossomed into genuine, lasting friendship. She built her own thriving territory alongside her plant research, her reputation for careful, patient cultivation mirroring Jang Hyun's own governing style. Baek Kyan's family connections continued proving invaluable. Distant relatives across the dark world slowly aligning themselves with the growing coalition. Will's combat department had grown into a genuine military academy, training not just warriors but future commanders capable of independent strategic thought. Sun Wukong's alchemy had matured into something approaching legendary status, his pills sought after by allied territories throughout the region. Jang Hyun reflected often on how differently things might have unfolded had he chosen aggression over patience during those critical early days. Singol's memory served as a permanent, useful reminder. Proof positive of exactly what unchecked pride and cruelty ultimately cost a lord. The coalition Jang Hyun had built now stretched across a dozen regions, unified not by conquest alone, but by genuine, demonstrated fairness. His underground city had grown into something resembling a true capital. Towering buildings now numbering in the dozens across multiple levels. The artificial sun still rose and set on its programmed blue star schedule, a small, deliberate comfort for a population that remembered home fondly. New arrivals still wept sometimes at their first sight of the city, though the reaction had softened somewhat as word of its wonders spread widely. Jang Hyun made it a point to personally greet particularly notable newcomers, understanding that a lord's genuine attention mattered more than any grand gesture. The arena badge on his chest had long since reached platinum rank, its effects now substantial enough to notably enhance his entire combat profile. He rarely needed to rely on it directly anymore, his ant army and mechanical support making personal combat almost unnecessary in most situations. Still, he trained diligently, understanding that a lord who let his own strength atrophy invited exactly the kind of challenge Singol once posed. The dark world beyond his coalition's borders remained vast and largely unknown. Countless regions still hidden beyond the edges of his current intelligence. Jang Hyun understood this expansion, however successful, represented only a small fraction of a much larger, much stranger world still waiting to be explored. He began planning, carefully and patiently, for eventual contact with regions far beyond anything his sentry ants had yet mapped or scouted. Wang Hyun's research suggested the dark world's biology grew stranger and more powerful the further one traveled from any given starting point. Whatever waited in those distant, Unexplored regions would likely dwarf anything Jang Hyun had faced so far. A sobering thought he took seriously. He intended to meet that eventual challenge exactly as he'd met every challenge before it, with patience, careful preparation, and genuine, trusted alliances. The lesson of Singol's fall remained his guiding principle through every subsequent decision. Structure and loyalty always outlasting raw, reckless power. His coalition's combined strength now rivaled or exceeded anything a single lord, however talented, could ever hope to build entirely alone. That, more than any individual achievement, felt like the truest measure of everything he'd accomplished since that first desperate night. Beneath his own bed, a pillar of blood-red light had once revealed a frightened boy stepping out of a stone gate. Uncertain of his own strange new power, that boy had become something the wider dark world would eventually have to reckon with. A lord who understood rules better than raw force. Jang Hyun stood one evening at his familiar floor-to-ceiling window, watching his sprawling capital settle into its programmed, peaceful evening rhythm. Somewhere below, thousands of ants and humans alike lived, worked, traded, and rested, each one another thread in a civilization built on patience. Somewhere beyond his borders, a vast and largely unknown dark world waited, full of both danger and opportunity in equal, uncertain measure. Jang Hyun intended to meet all of it exactly as he always had, calm, prepared, patient, and utterly unwilling to underestimate anyone again. The story of the archer, who was secretly a beast tamer, had become the story of a lord who built an empire on trust rather than fear. It was not the story anyone would have predicted when a single arrow first struck a bearded stranger in a crude, unfamiliar arena. It was better, stranger, far more enduring than the simple tale of one man's raw combat strength could ever have been alone. Jang Hyun had once been dismissed as merely an archer, a footnote in other lords' calculations, easy to underestimate and easy to overlook. He had built, in the months since, an empire spanning multiple regions, an army of gold-ranked ants, and a mech that few dared challenge. Not because destiny had chosen him for greatness, because he had chosen, deliberately and patiently, to build something worth protecting fiercely. The dragon bone bow still hung on his office wall, a humble reminder of where this impossible journey had first, quietly begun. Tak Mongiel still served faithfully as his most trusted administrator, his loyalty never once wavering through every conquest and every peaceful alliance since. Jang Hyun's laboratory continued producing breakthroughs that reshaped what Jang Hyun's ant army was capable of achieving with each passing season. Swift Shadows still commanded the Sentry Ant Legions with the same fierce discipline she'd shown since that very first dangerous night of scouting. Mars and her self-destruct clans still found genuine, proud meaning in their explosive purpose, exactly as she'd once explained so simply to her lord. Nine still worked tirelessly in her laboratory, her advancement having opened doors that continued surprising even her with each new invention. Will, Cheonha, Baek Kyan, and Sun Wipong remained his closest, most trusted allies. Bonds forged through shared struggle and genuine mutual respect. Together, they had built something far greater than any single lord's ambition could ever have accomplished. Alone, a coalition rooted in patient trust. Jang Hyun turned from his window that evening, walked to his desk, and reviewed one final report before allowing himself well-earned rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new territories to consider, new distant rivals whose strength and character remained entirely unknown to him yet. Tonight, he simply rested, secure in the knowledge that whatever came next, he would face it exactly as he'd faced everything before it. Patient, prepared, surrounded by allies who had chosen, again and again, to trust him with the vast responsibility of leadership. The eternal night that had once threatened to end everything had instead become the crucible that forged an empire nobody had seen coming. Jang Hyun closed his eyes that night with the same quiet confidence that had carried him through every battle since that very first arrow. He was no longer simply an archer, mistaken and underestimated by rivals who never understood the true scale of what hid beneath his shelter. He was a beast tamer, a rule maker, a lord who had proven, decisively and repeatedly, that patience always outlasted reckless, arrogant pride. The dark world stretched on endlessly beyond his current borders, vast and mostly unknown, waiting for whatever came next in this impossible new existence. Jang Hyun intended to meet every single test it offered exactly the way he always had, calm, patient, and utterly, completely prepared, because he had learned the truest lesson this brutal new world had to teach. Structure and genuine loyalty would always outlast raw, unchecked power. The swift shadow archer had been a convenient disguise for a season. The truth beneath it had always been something far more enduring. A lord who understood that true dominion was never measured by the size of an army, but by the rules a leader patiently chose to build. 5 regions had become a dozen, a dozen would eventually become more. Patient expansion always preferred over reckless, unnecessary conquest. Somewhere beneath his sprawling capital, an army of gold-ranked ants slept soundly in perfect formation, ready the instant their lord called upon them. Somewhere in a quiet laboratory, a mechanical companion continued refining inventions that would shape the coalition's future for years still to come. Somewhere across a dozen unified territories, thousands of subjects lived ordinary, comfortable lives protected by an empire built on genuine trust. This was never the end of Jang Hyun's story. It was simply the closing of its earliest, and by far its smallest, chapter. Beyond his current borders waited a dark world of countless regions, each one a new test, a new opportunity, a new story still unwritten. Jang Hyun rose from his desk one final time that evening, walked to his window, and looked out at everything he had patiently built. Whatever the dark world sent next, whatever distant lord or hidden threat eventually emerged from beyond his current, expanding borders, he would be ready. He turned from the window, extinguished the last of his office lights, and allowed himself, finally and completely, a well-earned night of genuine rest. Tomorrow the coalition would continue its patient, steady expansion. Tonight, the lord who had once been mistaken for a simple archer simply slept, secure, prepared, surrounded by an empire and an army built not on fear, but on the quiet, unshakable trust of everyone who had chosen to stay. The story of the archer, who was secretly an ant lord, had become something far greater than anyone, including Jang Hyun himself, could have predicted. It had become the story of patience triumphing over pride, of structure outlasting chaos, of genuine loyalty proving stronger than any inherited bloodline. Jang Hyun slept soundly that night, at peace at home, surrounded by everything he had built from nothing but a single arrow and stubborn will. The dragon bone bow watched silently from its place on the wall, a humble monument to every impossible night that had come before it. Somewhere beneath his bed, in the deepest levels of his sprawling underground city, an ant colony numbering in the thousands slept peacefully too, waiting, patient as ever, for whatever their lord asked of them next in this vast, uncertain, endlessly unfolding dark new world. Months turned steadily into what would eventually become years, the coalition growing not through conquest alone, but through demonstrated, consistent fairness. Jang Hyun's reputation preceded him now wherever sentry ants scouted, distant lords choosing negotiation over confrontation the moment his name was mentioned. Wang Hyun's laboratory had trained an entire generation of researchers, spreading advanced gene combination knowledge across every allied territory in the coalition. O9's mechanical innovations had similarly spread, smaller support units now assisting construction and defense throughout every corner of the expanding domain. Swift Shadow trained new generations of sentry ant commanders, each one carrying forward the same fierce discipline she'd first demonstrated years earlier. Mars' self-destruct clan had grown into a specialized elite unit, deployed carefully and respectfully whenever their explosive purpose was genuinely needed. The hovering ant transport network now connected every territory in the coalition, resources and reinforcements flowing freely across vast, previously isolated distances. Sumi Pong's alchemy legacy continued through students he personally trained, his pills becoming a foundational resource throughout the entire coalition. Chiang's research into black mist neutralizing plants finally bore full fruit, reducing the coalition's dependence on glory-based immunity significantly. This breakthrough alone reshaped strategic planning across every territory, freeing resources once dedicated entirely toward maintaining constant vigilant defense. Will's military academy had produced commanders capable of leading independent operations, freeing Jang Hyun from needing to personally oversee every conflict. Baekhyun's diplomatic network had grown into something resembling a genuine intelligence service, tracking developments across dozens of distant, unexplored regions. Jang Hyun found himself, increasingly, in the role of a genuine statesman rather than merely a battlefield commander, guiding rather than personally fighting. He didn't mind the shift, understanding that a coalition this large required steady, patient governance far more than any single lord's personal strength. His own advancement continued steadily in the background, comprehension of rules and structure deepening with every fair decision, every patient negotiation. He suspected the second-tier advancement, once purely theoretical, now sat within genuine reach, should the right catalyst ever finally present itself. Whatever that catalyst turned out to be, he trusted he would recognize it when it arrived, exactly as he'd recognized every opportunity before it. The dark world beyond his coalition's borders remained vast, mostly unexplored, and full of both genuine danger and genuine, patient opportunity alike. Jang Hyun continued expanding his intelligence network carefully, sentry ants and allied scouts mapping ever further into previously unknown, uncharted territory. Reports occasionally surfaced of stranger, more powerful phenomena in distant regions. Hints of a dark world far more complex than his early experience suggested. He filed each report away carefully, understanding that patient preparation today would determine his coalition's readiness for whatever eventually emerged from those distant unknowns. His underground capital had grown into something resembling a true metropolis, its population numbering now in the tens of thousands across the coalition. The artificial sun still rose and set faithfully on its original blue star schedule, a comforting constant amid years of steady, patient change. New arrivals still occasionally wept at their first glimpse of the city, though most now arrived already knowing exactly what fair, stable governance meant. Jang Hyun made a point still of personally greeting notable new arrivals, refusing to let the coalition's growth erode his connection to individual subjects. That connection, more than any army or any advancement, remained the true foundation of everything he had built since that very first terrified night. He often thought back to the boy who had once drawn a single trembling arrow against an unfamiliar stranger in a crude, unfamiliar arena. That boy had become something the entire dark world eventually had to reckon with. A lord who understood that rules outlasted raw, reckless force. Singol's name had faded almost entirely from memory now, remembered mostly as a cautionary tale told to new recruits during their earliest orientation. A lesson in exactly what unchecked pride and cruelty ultimately cost any lord foolish enough to build an empire on fear rather than trust. Jang Hyun's own empire stood as the clearest possible counterexample, patient, structured, and genuinely loved by the very people who lived within it. He understood this was not simply luck or coincidence, but the direct, deliberate result of every careful choice he'd made since that first desperate night. Choosing patience over aggression, choosing structure over chaos, choosing genuine loyalty over fear-based control at every single critical juncture along the way. That pattern of choices, repeated consistently across years of steady growth, had built something far more durable than any single lord's raw strength alone. An empire capable of outlasting its founder, should the need ever arise. Built on institutions and trust rather than one person's individual power. Jang Hyun found genuine comfort in that thought, understanding that true leadership meant building something capable of continuing long after he himself was gone. He stood one final evening at his familiar floor-to-ceiling window, watching a metropolis of tens of thousands settle into its peaceful, programmed evening. Somewhere below, ants and humans alike lived side by side, each contributing their own unique strength toward a civilization built on patient, mutual trust. Somewhere beyond his ever-expanding borders, a vast dark world continued its endless, mostly unknown unfolding, full of both danger and genuine opportunity. Jang Hyun intended to meet whatever came from that vast unknown exactly as he always had, calm, patient, prepared, and never again underestimated, because he had proven, decisively and repeatedly across years of steady growth, that structure and genuine loyalty always outlasted raw, unchecked power. The story of the archer, who was secretly the region's most powerful beast tamer, had become something far greater than any single battle or conquest. It had become the story of an entire civilization built patiently from nothing but ants, trust, and one man's stubborn, quiet refusal to be underestimated. Jang Hyun turned from his window that final evening, walked to his desk, and reviewed the coalition's latest comprehensive report one final time. Population numbering in the tens of thousands, territory spanning a dozen unified regions, an army of gold-ranked ants numbering in the countless thousands, a mech standing quietly in reserve, capable of deterring nearly any conceivable threat, alliances built on genuine trust rather than fear or coercion. Every metric told the same consistent story, patient, structured growth built on genuine foundations rather than any fleeting, reckless conquest or borrowed strength. He closed the report, extinguished his office lights, and allowed himself, one final time, the quiet satisfaction of a leader who had built something lasting. Tomorrow would bring new challenges from beyond the borders of his coalition, new territories to consider, new distant rivals whose character remained unknown. Tonight, he simply rested, secure in the absolute certainty that whatever the vast dark world eventually sent his way, he would already be ready for it, because he had learned patiently and repeatedly across years of steady, deliberate growth, the truest lesson this brutal new existence had to offer. Structure outlasted chaos, patience outlasted pride, and genuine loyalty, built carefully over time, always outlasted any army built purely on fear or force alone. The swift shadow archer had been a convenient disguise for one short, desperate season, at the very beginning of an impossibly long journey. The truth beneath that disguise had always been something far more enduring. A beast tamer who understood that true power lived in the rules you built. 5 regions had become a dozen had become the foundation for something greater still. Patient expansion always preferred over reckless conquest. Somewhere beneath his sprawling metropolis, an army of gold-ranked ants slept soundly and perfect, disciplined formation, ready the instant their lord called. Somewhere in a quiet, well-equipped laboratory, a mechanical companion continued refining inventions that would shape the coalition's future for generations still to come. Somewhere across a dozen unified territories, tens of thousands of subjects lived ordinary, comfortable, genuinely safe lives within an empire built on trust. This was never truly the end of Jang Hyun's story. It remained, even after years of steady growth, simply the closing of its earliest chapters. Beyond his coalition's expanding borders waited a dark world of countless unexplored regions, each one a new test, a new story still entirely unwritten. Jang Hyun rose from his desk one final time, walked once more to his window, and looked out at everything he had so patiently built. Whatever the dark world sent next, whatever distant lord or hidden threat eventually emerged from beyond his current, ever-expanding borders, he would meet it, calm, patient, prepared, surrounded by an empire and an army built not on fear, but on the quiet, unshakable trust of everyone who had chosen to stay. He turned from the window, extinguished the last light in his office, and allowed himself, finally and completely, a well-earned, peaceful night of rest. Tomorrow the coalition would continue its patient, deliberate expansion into whatever the dark world revealed next, one careful, structured step at a time. Tonight, the lord once mistaken for a simple archer simply slept, secure, prepared, and surrounded by everything his patience had earned him. The story of the archer, who was secretly the region's most dangerous beast tamer, had become something far greater than anyone could have originally predicted. It had become the story of patience triumphing decisively over pride, of structure outlasting chaos, of genuine loyalty proving stronger than any inherited bloodline. Jang Hyun slept soundly that night, at peace at home, surrounded by everything he had built from nothing but a single trembling arrow and stubborn will. The dragon bone bow still watched silently from its place on his office wall, a humble monument to every impossible night that had come before it. Somewhere beneath his bed, in the deepest levels of his sprawling underground capital, an ant colony numbering in the countless thousands slept peacefully too, waiting, patient as ever, for whatever their lord asked of them next in this vast, uncertain, endlessly unfolding dark new world beyond every known border. He was no longer simply an archer, mistaken and underestimated by rivals who never understood the true scale of what waited beneath his shelter. He was a beast tamer, a rule maker, a statesman, a lord who had proven, decisively and repeatedly across years of patient growth, exactly what endured. Not the loudest army, not the proudest bloodline, but the quiet, patient structure of trust, built carefully, one fair decision at a time. The dark world stretched on endlessly beyond every border he'd ever mapped, vast and mostly unknown, waiting for whatever came next in this new existence. Jang Hyun intended to meet every single test it offered exactly the way he always had, calm, patient, prepared, and never again underestimated by anyone. Because he had learned, through every conquest and every peaceful alliance alike, the truest lesson this brutal new world had ever offered any lord. Structure and genuine loyalty would always, eventually, outlast raw, unchecked power. No matter how impressive that power appeared in any single given moment, the swift shadow archer had been a convenient disguise, worn briefly at the very beginning of an impossibly long and ever-unfolding journey. The truth beneath that disguise had always been something far more enduring. A lord who understood that true dominion lived in the rules patiently built. 5 regions had become a dozen had become the seed of something greater still. Patient expansion forever preferred over reckless conquest. Somewhere beneath his sprawling metropolis, an army of gold-ranked ants slept soundly and perfect, disciplined formation, ready the instant their lord ever called. Somewhere in a quiet laboratory, a mechanical companion once known simply as O9 continued refining inventions that would shape the coalition for generations. Somewhere across a dozen unified territories, tens of thousands of subjects lived genuinely safe, comfortable lives within an empire built entirely on trust. This was never truly the end of Jang Hyun's remarkable story. Even after years of patient, steady growth, it remained only its earliest chapter. Beyond his coalition's ever-expanding borders waited a dark world of countless unexplored regions, each one a new test, a story still entirely unwritten. Jang Hyun rose from his desk one truly final time, walked once more to his familiar window, and looked out at everything he had patiently built. Whatever the dark world eventually sent next, whatever distant lord or hidden threat emerged from beyond his ever-expanding borders, he would meet it fully, calm, patient, prepared, surrounded always by an empire and an army built not on fear, but on the quiet, unshakable trust of everyone who stayed. He turned from the window one final time, extinguished the last light in his office, and allowed himself a well-earned, peaceful, and complete night of rest. Tomorrow the coalition would continue its patient, deliberate expansion, one careful and structured step at a time, exactly as it always had before. Tonight, the Lord, once mistaken for nothing more than a simple archer, simply slept, secure, prepared, surrounded by everything his patience had rightfully earned him. The story of the archer, who was secretly the region's most dangerous beast tamer, had become something greater than anyone could have originally predicted. It had become, finally and completely, the story of patience triumphing over pride, of structure outlasting chaos, of loyalty outlasting any inherited bloodline. Jang Hyun, once just a frightened survivor drawing a single trembling arrow, had built a civilization worth protecting with absolutely everything he had. Tak Mongiel, Wang Hyun, Swift Shadow, Mars, 09, Will, Chiang Ha, Baek Hyun, and Sun Wipong had become the family that made every hard night worth it. Together, across a dozen unified regions and years of patient growth, they had turned a desperate secret beneath a bed into something worth staying for. Not because circumstance demanded it, because every single one of them, somewhere along this impossibly long journey, had genuinely chosen to remain. A boy pulled from obscurity by nothing but a single arrow, and a stubborn refusal to be underestimated had become something the dark world never expected. He had become a hero to those he protected. He had become a lord worth genuine loyalty. He had become exactly who he had always fought to be. And nothing left in that vast, mostly unexplored dark world, no rival lord, no ancient threat, no ambitious bloodline was strong enough to take that away. Jang Hyun slept on beneath the artificial stars of his own making, at peace at home, his dragon bone bow watching quietly over everything that mattered. The story of the archer and his secret and army had become the story of a family chosen, a coalition protected, and a life fully, deliberately lived. It was, in the end, exactly the story he had always deserved to have. And it was, at long last, entirely his own. The final chapter of that first impossible year of conquest closed quietly, the way most true, lasting victories always do, without unnecessary fanfare. Just a lord, and an army, a mechanical companion, and a civilization that no longer needed fear to hold itself together night after night. Jang Hyun had built his way from nothing into everything, one patient, deliberate, unforgettable decision at a time, across years of steady growth. And he intended to keep building, keep protecting, keep finding every fair path forward the vast dark world still had hidden within it. Because somewhere, always, another region waited, another people needed protecting, another lesson in patience waited to be learned by someone still underestimated. And Jang Hyun, more than anyone else in that entire dark world, understood exactly what that patient, quiet opportunity truly meant for those willing to seize it. Not conquest for its own sake, not power for the sake of proving a point, simply the patient, deliberate work of building something worth trusting. That was the truth he carried forward into every single year that followed his very first desperate night beneath a bed that had once terrified him. The truth that had started with a single trembling arrow, a bearded stranger, and a frightened survivor who refused to stay invisible any longer. The truth that power, real and lasting power, was never truly about what you could take from the dark world around you. It was about what you chose to build, patiently and deliberately, once you finally held the strength required to do so. Jang Hyun chose, every single day across every single year, to build exactly what mattered most to the people who had chosen to follow him. And that choice, more than any skill, any rank, any army of gold-ranked ants, defined every single part of who he had truly become. The tunnels beneath his capital would always have more chambers waiting to be built. The coalition would always have more regions willing to join. And Jang Hyun, dragon bone bow at his side, an army at his call, would always be ready to answer whenever the dark world came calling. Because once you have built an empire from nothing but a single arrow and stubborn, patient will, the whole dark world starts looking like a foundation. And Jang Hyun had learned, through every conquest, every alliance, every quiet evening surrounded by the people and creatures who mattered most, one final truth. The greatest treasure his journey had ever given him was never the ants, the territory, or the raw power he'd accumulated along the way. It was the family he had built while earning it, one patient, hard-won decision at a time, across years that had reshaped an entire region. That family remained his true foundation through every battle that followed, grounding him whenever the sheer weight of his own power threatened to isolate him. Tak Mongiel often reminded him that even the strongest lords needed people who saw them as more than simply their rank or their army's size. Wang Hyun's quiet dedication reminded him daily that genuine curiosity, patiently pursued, could reshape an empire as thoroughly as any battlefield victory. Swift Shadow's fierce loyalty reminded him that discipline and devotion, properly nurtured, built armies far stronger than fear or coercion ever truly could. Together they had weathered arrogant rivals, desperate wars, and the quiet, constant work of governing fairly, emerging each time more certain of what mattered. The coalition Jang Hyun had built continued its careful, patient expansion long after this chapter of his story closed, one fair decision at a time. Grace and patience, not brute force alone, had carried him from a single terrified arrow to the quiet, unshakable foundation of an entire civilization. The dragon bone bow remained mounted on his wall, unused in true combat for years now, yet never once considered for removal or replacement. It reminded him, every single day, exactly where this impossible journey had first, quietly begun. In fear, in desperation, in one single choice to fight. Now that choice had become an empire, a family, a legacy that would likely outlast even Jang Hyun himself, exactly as true leadership should. The gate hummed one final time as this chapter of his story closed, patient, eternal, and completely, finally, entirely his own to carry forward. Jang Hyun, the archer once mistaken for nothing more than a lucky marksman, had become exactly who he was always meant to become. Not because destiny had chosen him specifically, because he had chosen, again and again across years of patient growth, to answer when the dark world called. The dragon bone bow rested quietly above his desk, a humble monument to every impossible night that had led to everything he now protected. And somewhere beneath his sprawling capital, his ant army slept on, patient and endless, waiting for whatever the dark world's next chapter demanded of them. This was not the end of Jang Hyun's story. It was simply the moment his patient survival had finally become something far greater than mere survival. It had become purpose. It had become family. It had become a civilization nobody, least of all the lords who once underestimated him, could have predicted. Jang Hyun, once just a frightened survivor with a single dragon bone bow, had built a world worth protecting with absolutely everything he possessed. His allies, once scattered strangers bound only by circumstance, had become the family he would fight anything to protect, without a single moment's hesitation. Together, across a dozen unified regions and years of patient, deliberate growth, they had turned a desperate secret into something worth building a life around. Not because they had to, because, somewhere along this impossibly long and winding journey, every single one of them had genuinely chosen to remain. A survivor pulled from total obscurity by nothing but a single arrow, and stubborn, patient will had become something the dark world never saw coming. He had become a lord. He had become a protector. He had become exactly who he had always, secretly, fought to be since that very first night. And nothing left in that vast, mostly unexplored dark world was strong enough to ever take that hard-won identity away from him again. Jang Hyun slept on beneath his artificial stars, at peace at home, his dragon bone bow watching quietly over a civilization that finally completely mattered. The story of the archer and his secret and empire had become the story of a family chosen, a coalition protected, and a life fully, deliberately lived. It was, in the end, exactly the story he had always deserved to have, built patiently, one fair and deliberate choice at a time. And it belonged, now and always, entirely and completely to him, a lord who had proven that patience outlasts every single form of raw, reckless power. Somewhere far below, and slept in perfect formation, somewhere across a dozen regions, families lived safely under a rule built on trust rather than fear. And somewhere in a quiet office, a dragon bone bow rested silently, watching over the empire it had helped begin, patient and unforgotten. Jang Hyun, once mistaken for a simple archer, had become the region's most patient, most trusted, and most enduring lord, and his story was only truly beginning.